Hello friends, today we'll discuss about how the hormone brings about its reaction in the body. That is the mechanism of hormone action from the site of its release, that is endocrine gland, to its response in the target cell. We could see that the response normally depends on both the hormone and the target cell, the nature of hormone and the target cell. We know that hormones are normally based on its solubility can be classified as lipid soluble and water soluble. So if it is a lipid soluble hormone, it binds to a receptor which is present inside the cell. But whereas if it is a water soluble hormone, it binds to the receptor which is seen on the surface of the plasma membrane, because water soluble hormone cannot pass through the plasma membrane. It should be very thorough. Plasma membrane is bilipid nature, whereas our hormone is a water soluble hormone. So how come the information of a water soluble hormone is passed on? It is passed through a second messenger, because it activates the second messenger system, and the magnitude of signal has been amplified as and when it is passed to next stages. Now we could say that when I speak about the response of the target cell, it also depends on different factors like the hormone's concentration, the abundance of target present on the target cell, the receptors on the target cell, and also the influence exerted by other hormones. Like the effect can be permissive, the effect can be synergistic, and the effect can be antagonistic. Now we'll go on detail with the different category of hormone. We'll start with the lipid soluble hormone. We could see that when the lipid soluble hormone, if it is this green one, it is released from the endocrine gland, it enters the blood. But how come it has been transported through the blood till it reaches the target is a question. We could see that since the blood is the composition, the major part is water, it cannot simply be carried likewise. There should be some carrier protein, which is in fact the part of the blood component. And this carrier protein act as the carrier for carrying the lipid soluble hormone till it reaches the target. Once the hormone enters the blood, it binds with the carrier protein and it is transported till it finds the target. How is a hormone finds a target? Hormones find its target by the presence of a specific receptor on the target. Here we could see that the receptor will be present inside the plasma membrane, or it may be inside the nucleus. So how come? So here we can see that since our hormone is lipid itself, with lipid soluble, it with no difficulty, once it finds the receptor target cell, it detaches from the carrier protein and it simply passes through the plasma membrane. And sometimes it will find the receptor in the cytoplasm, or sometimes it may be finding it inside the nucleus. Once it finds the receptor, it binds to the receptor, forming a hormone receptor complex. Once this complex is formed, it finds its way into the nucleus, where it binds to the DNA promoter. And the DNA will be switched on. It will be made to express. So once the complex binds to the DNA will start expressing. That is, it undergoes transcription first, forming the mRNA. And once the mRNA is formed, it will move out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm, going to the ribosome, which is also known as the protein factory. And this mRNA, once it reaches the ribosome, the translation happens and the expected protein will be produced. So that is the function of the mechanism of lipid soluble hormone. Now next we'll see about the mechanism of water-soluble hormone. We could see that the water-soluble hormones, once it is released from the endocrine gland, it enters the blood. And since the major constituent of the blood is water, here the water-soluble hormone, without any requirement of any carrier, will simply be carried by the plasma of the blood. And once it finds its target, how? When it finds its receptors, specific receptor possessing target cell. So this here we can see, since the hormone is a water soluble hormone, they cannot simply cross the plasma membrane, which is having a bilipid nature. So the receptors will normally be present on the surface of the plasma membrane. So they come and binds to the receptor at the surface of the plasma membrane. And here the as I said, just imagine if you are going to some bungalows or some offices where there is a restriction of entrance. So here how are you going to pass on the information? You probably will pass on your information to another person, or maybe a gatekeeper or a security. Here that security or the gatekeeper act as a second messenger. The same system functions in water-soluble hormone. The hormone by itself, which is a messenger, which have the information signal, cannot enter the cell. So the information will be passed through activating a second messenger system. We'll just see it in detail. We could see that once the water-soluble hormones bind to the receptor, and the receptor normally will be a G protein receptor with 3 subunits, and once the water-soluble hormone binds to the receptor, the G protein is it splits, and the subunits will be splitting up. The 3 subunit will split up and they move on the inner surface of the plasma membrane, where they find an enzyme which is in an inactive form. And the inactive enzyme is nothing but the adenylate cyclase. So this G protein subunits, which have splitted up, they move and activates the adenylate cyclase. So this enzyme have a role. The function of adenylate cyclase is to convert a ATP to a cyclic AMP. And here in this mechanism, the cyclic AMP is the second messenger. Just think, it is the gatekeeper or the security person who is going to pass your information to the interior. So cyclic AMP is activated, and this cyclic AMP will activate other proteins in the cell. And before we move in detail, we should be very thorough that in a cell, most of the enzymes will be in an inactive form, and they are activated only when the role of that particular enzyme is required. So here cyclic AMP will activate another enzyme known as protein kinase, and it will be activated into a activated protein kinase. And this protein kinase has a great role to play. What is the function of a normal protein kinase is that it adds a phosphate group to a protein and make them functional. So here we can see that there may be some biologically required proteins present in the cell in an inactive form. So once this protein kinase is activated, they use the ATP and they convert the ATP into ADP, and that one phosphate is added to this protein, and this cellular protein gets phosphorylated. And we can see that here wise this mechanisms bring about the phosphorylation of lots and lots of cellular protein, and this causes physiological response. So this is the functional role of lipid soluble and water soluble hormones.